All right. Thank you very much for joining me in this lecture session. So today also we will continue our discussion on philosophy, and we're going to talk about medieval philosophies, ages, and philosophers. As you can see on the screen, I have already shared today's lecture with you, so you can see a brief philosophical scale. So in our earlier class, we talked about the introduction of this medieval period. Now today we'll talk about its development and also the ages and the important philosophers of this age, so that we can have a clear idea about this medieval philosophy. Now on the text, you can see the first title says the late antique to early Middle Ages. So first thing, we're going to talk about the late antique to early Middle Ages. That means from the very first period of the Middle Age to early Middle Age. Now it started with the patristic philosophers. Do you have any idea what does it mean, patristic? Can anyone tell me what does it mean, patristic? Is there anyone who can respond? Do you know the meaning of the word patristic?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll explain it to you. Patristic means, people like ecclesiastical dignitaries, or you can say the bishops. We call them patristic. That means those people who are working for the church. So we call them patristic. The philosophers actually who are from that trend, from churches, we call them patristic philosophers. Actually, they were theologians, but still they try to develop the philosophy related with the religion. So that's why we call them patristic philosophers. Now, in the early monotheistic philosophers were the religious minority, surrounded by vast dispersions of pagan philosophers. Early Christian philosophers were an even more minoritarian minority. Here, minoritarian means, a group of people who are dominated by a minority. That means these church people, or you can see the clergymen or the bishops, they were very powerful and they have the primacy of the large group of people. So that's why we call it minoritarian minority. But that means they're very powerful at that time, these Christian philosophers. So their New Testament doctrines were unexplained, their theological concepts were undeveloped, and the responses were unformed against pagan arguments. There was much work to be done. That means the things that they were working with, it was undeveloped, and much work to be done to have a patristic philosophy in the right form. So they were working on it in the early age, or we can see the earliest stage of the Middle Ages. Now, most early patristic philosophy consisted in defense of its religious principles, like Aristotelian, Stoic, then materialist, and diverse esoteric doctrines can be found within this work. But it is for the most part Platonic. That means I told you that there is a two group of people, or two stream, who are actually people are influenced, especially this patristic philosophy, or another way they were influenced by either by the Aristotle or either by Plato. So most early patristic philosophy, that's why he says that they were Aristotelian. They're following Aristotle, and also they're following Plato. So those who are following Plato, we call them Platonic. And as you know, that means there is a philosopher who is called Platon. So and he actually introduced this idea of this this new Platonism. And people, at that time, those Christian theologians, they were influenced by those philosophies. Now the first real, and there is some schism. Schism means some kind of separation, or between two different groups of philosophers. Separation between two different groups of philosophers. That's why we call it schism or rift. So the first real schism in the late antique or early patristic philosophers was about a relation of scriptures and Greek philosophy. That means you can see the relation of scripture and Greek. Greek was pagan philosophy. We know it very well. That means they were not monotheistic. Mostly all those philosophies, they were based on different kinds of gods and goddesses that was at that time that were in vogue or in practice in Greece. These patristic philosophers, they were trying to establish this kind of relationship between the scripture and the Greek philosophy. And the divide especially was between those who argued that the New Testament utilized Greek philosophy and those, that is, they were Catholic, who eschewed any Greek philosophical influence of religious scripture. That means one group of people, the Protestant, they say that the New Testament utilized Greek philosophy, and on the other end, the Catholic, you know that these two groups, Protestant and Catholic, there are two different strands or streams of Christianity. So the Protestant, they say that they use Greek philosophy in explaining New Testament, and on the other hand, Catholic actually they gave up this idea. They say that Greek philosophical influence there must not be in the religious scripture. So this was the difference between these two groups. Then again, there is another, schism, or second kind of schism of group of people. These philosophers, especially, they were concerned their answers to the interplay between faith and reason. So the first group of philosophers in the medieval philosophy or medieval ages, they were thinking about the relation of the scripture and the Greek philosophy. And the second group of philosophers, they were trying to understand the interplay between the faith and reason. Because you see, when you believe in something, blindly, especially we call it faith, but sometimes we try to use reason to understand that faith. So the second group of philosophers, they were trying to understand the relationship between faith and reason, that how can reason help us to understand our faith properly. Now, both groups held the religious teachings to be supreme, but one argued the reason, positively supplemented and helped elucidate faith, whereas the other argued that reason had no part to play in matters of faith whatsoever. And when it intervened, this was often the source of heresies. So you see, one group of philosophers who are under this group, that is interplay between faith and reason, who are trying to explore these ideas. So among these philosophers, there is two groups. One group, they found that reason is, which is actually helpful to understand the faith. But another group of philosophers, they say that, no, reason can't help to understand the faith. Faith is faith, simply have to accept it. You cannot have any reason in it. When you try to apply logic or reason to understand faith, then it will give rise to different kinds of heresies. Heresies means those ideas that go against the religious belief, that we call heresies. The similar form is heresy. That heresy means the belief or ideas that goes against the existing religious belief. We call it heresy. So these philosophers, they say that if you try to use reason or logic to understand faith, then definitely it's going to, cause heresies in your religion or religious belief. Now, the fourth, in the fourth century, you can see some positive news for the Christian philosophy. We can see that because you see the conversion of the Constantine. Constantine, actually, he was the emperor of the Constantinople, present days, that is Turkey. This is Constantinople. So the emperor himself, he embraced Christianity as his religion, and then he also ordered all the people of his empire to embrace Christianity. So, and Christianity became the official religion of that time in Constantine. So, which initiated the concretization of the political ordering of the church. So, you see, the church actually became very powerful because the emperor himself, he embraced Christianity. And at that time, there was a council, and it was held in 325 BC. The council is called the First Council of Nicaea. The Nicaea is a place in today's, today's Turkey. It's a place. It was a place in Turkey that we call Turkey these days. So Nicaea is a place in Turkey, and this council was held in Nicaea in 325, at which the church concretized its views on the conception of the Trinity. You know, there is the idea of Trinity in Christianity. That means the God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So this is the idea of the Trinity, and this idea of the Trinity was adopted by the First Council of Nicaea in 325. This legitimacy and clarification of church position aided the philosophical undertaking. So you can see the church became very powerful because the emperor himself, he embraced Christianity, and they also held different meetings, different councils, and through these councils, they are also imposing different Christian rules, and also they're creating different Christian rules and Christian rites and rituals, and they became very powerful. So they started their philosophical exploration on the basis of their Christian belief at that time in the medieval period. So the Greek philosophers of the 14th century include those actually who took these Greek philosophies at that time. I mean, there are some names that we can just have here, like uh, Eusebius, then Gregory of Nazianzus, then Basil of Crete, then Nemesius, and most importantly, Gregory of Nyssa, who undertook the first rational argument for all the teachings of Church, including its mysteries, a pursuit continued by Anselm. Gregory's Platonism made him emphasize the purification of the human soul and humanity's return to God, which deeply influenced the mystical philosophies of John Scotus, Eugenia, and Bernard of Clairvaux. The Latin philosophers of the 14th century include those actually who are from the Latin background, I mean from Roman Empire. They are Maristus Victorius, Ambrose, and Augustine. The most important name is Augustine, and for our course, actually, we will concentrate Augustine more than all the aforementioned names. So we don't need to be that much about those philosophers, but mostly we'll concentrate on Augustine. So into the 5th century, the most notable Greek-inspired Christian philosopher is Pseudo-Dionysius. So you see, there is one was Augustine, and the second one, he was Pseudo-Dionysius. But it's still Pseudo-Dionysius, if you're interested, you can read about him. But we will concentrate on Augustine as a philosopher from this age. And, Saint Augustine and Saint Aquinas, these two important philosophers that we have to focus on for our course, especially for these medieval philosophies. And especially if you read them, then it will help us to understand the medieval philosophies and its development. Just for your understanding, I would like to say that St. Augustine actually he depended on the Neoplatonism, or you can say the Platonic explanation. He used this Platonic philosophy or the Neoplatonic philosophy to understand the Christian philosophy. So he tried to amalgamate these two different trends of knowledge. One is Greek philosophy, and another one is Christian theology. So he tried to have some fusion between these two. Okay, Saint Augustine that I'm talking about. On the other hand, Saint Aquinas, actually he depended heavily on the Aristotelian understanding. So he used Aristotelian philosophy or his you can say Aristotelian explanations to understand, or his philosophy to understand Christianity. So Augustine used Plato or Neoplatonic ideas, and Saint Aquinas, he used the Aristotelian philosophy to understand the Christianity. So that's the difference between these two persons, just to understand them easily. Now, Saint Augustine of Hippo's life is itself a work of art, recorded in critical detail by his own hand in his Confessions, his autobiography, his autobiographical exploration of his anxiety-ridden conversions, broadly including the conversion from infancy to adulthood, educationally from a reluctant student to a scholar, intellectually to philosophy and theology, and spiritually and religiously, converts from skepticism to Manichaeism and to Christianity. Just try to understand these few terms that I've already mentioned. That what was his change in his life, the Saint Augustine? So he changed from one form or one step of his life to another step of his life. So you see, there are lots of changes were going on in his life. So you see, from infancy to adulthood, educationally from a reluctant student to a scholar. So at the beginning, when he was when he was in his earliest stage of his life, he was not that much interested in education. But you see, from reluctant student, he was an indifferent student. From that, he turned to be a scholar. Then again, he intellectually evolved as a philosopher and also as a theologian. And then also you can see his development in his spiritual realm and also in the religious world. You can see he converts from skepticism to Manichaeism and to Christianity. So at the beginning, he was very much a skeptic about religion and about the existence of God. Then again, he converted to Manichaeism. You see, the Manichaeism is it's a kind of religion, and it developed in Persia, that means in present days Iran, and the person actually who was behind the development of this new trend of religion, his name was Mani, M-A-N-I. So from his name, we have got this Manichaeism. So this is another form of religion. So you see, Saint Augustine, he also embraced that religion. From there, he jumped to Christianity. So lots of changes you can see in his life. It's a complete evolution of life you can see in in Augustine's life. So his biography accounts for some of his intellectual influence, like his Greek and Roman education. So he knew Greek, and also he knew about the Roman education, and his Manichaeism that I've already mentioned, his exposure to escapism and New Platonism, and his Christian exposure and study. So he had huge knowledge about different fields of knowledge. So more specifically, we can argue that Augustine was strongly intellectually formed by the conjunction of New Platonism through Plotinus, that I've already mentioned that Plotinus, he started this New Platonic movement, or New Platonism, this kind of philosophy, he started this. So he followed, St. Augustine followed Plotinus, this New Platonism. And also, he was influenced by some of the philosophers like St. Ambrose and his scriptures. And then we can conclude that he as much embodies the merger of pagan Neoplatonism with Christian thought. That I have already mentioned at the very beginning of today's lecture that Saint Augustine, he took this pagan Neoplatonism, all these pagan Greek philosophies, and he tried to amalgamate those Greek philosophies with Christian thought. So that was his contribution for the understanding of this medieval philosophy. Now, Saint Augustine, actually, he spoke about him, and he wrote about Saint Augustine. Saint Aquinas writing about Saint Augustine, he's saying that whenever Augustine, who was saturated with the teachings of the Platonists, found in their writings anything consistent with the faith, he adopted it. And whatever he found contrary to the faith, he amended. So you see, he tried to use these teachings of Platonists, there's this new Platonic ideas, he tried to use those things to understand the Christian theology. But when he found any anomalies in this new Platonism or new Platonist ideas, then he will amend it. That means he will give his Christian faith the first priority. Then he will try to understand Christian faith on the basis of his understanding of this Greek philosophy. Now, I would like to skip some of the, some of the facts here, but if you have any personal interest to read those things, so you can read them. There's another most important philosophers of this medieval philosophy is Boethius. Here you can see I have written some few words here, and he's also another important figure of this age. And if you can recall that when I tried to explain in our introductory discussion about these medieval philosophers, I told about Boethius a little bit. So I don't want to repeat all those things, but for your understanding and so that you can relate to our today's discussion. So I'd like to mention very few information about Boethius. If you can recall that Boethius, actually, he was a very influential person, especially in the Roman court, and he translated most of these Aristotelian and Platonic, Plato's works, and also he added many commentaries with those. But at one point of his career, he was accused of treason, and then he was executed. So as a result, what happened that some of his works, actually, they were left unfinished. So he couldn't finish his whole translation work, but still he contributed hugely, in the translation work from Greek language to Latin language, because he was very worried about it, that maybe these semi-educated or uneducated, these Roman people, or these people from the Roman Empire, they might not have access to these Greek philosophy, Greek knowledge. So that's why he started translating from Greek language to Latin language all these Greek words. So that was his very influential contribution to this medieval philosophers, because he actually gave access to the Roman people. He created an access for the Roman people to have a taste or interest into the Greek philosophy. So that was his contribution. So if you're interested, you can read more about Boethius. Now I'd like to jump to page, let's say. Now it's on the handout, it's on page 7. So if you have the handout, you can go to page 7, or otherwise you can just look at the screen, because I've already shared this screen, I told you. So you can see it from there. Saint Thomas Aquinas. So we talked about Saint Augustine. So he was in the very first stage of this medieval philosophy. And in the later stage of the medieval philosophy, we can see Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas, Pope Leo III in 1879 declared Aquinas' philosophy to be the true Catholic philosophy. So you can see the Pope Leo the 13th, sorry, the Pope Leo the 13th, actually, he said that the Saint Aquinas' philosophical understanding of the Christian theology or Christian religion was a true Catholic philosophy. You see that his influence is, is very profound on the understanding of Christian theology. So whereas Augustine built upon Plato's theories, so I mentioned it that Saint Augustine, he built upon his, this idea based upon Plato's theories, but Aquinas used Aristotle for his foundation. Okay, so that's a major difference, however, between Aquinas and the Greeks was his support of a division between philosophy and religion. He argued that philosophy was based on reason, whereas religion was based on truths of revelation and held by faith. So you see, this is the main point here. Just try to focus that Saint Aquinas, though he took help from philosophy, especially the Aristotelian understanding of the philosophy, but his understanding was this, that philosophy was based upon on reason. But on the other hand, he was saying that faith was based upon on the truths of revelation. So faith was based on revelation, the divine revelation by the Almighty, the God. On the other hand, philosophy, the understanding of philosophy was based on reason. So he knew the demarcation line between these two, the reason and faith. You see? And on the basis of this, he tried to have the understanding using this reason to understand the faith. But he kept his faith intact always while actually understanding, this faith with the help of philosophy. He was very careful about it. So that's why Catholic, especially, they accept his, explanation, the Saint Aquinas explanation of Christian theology on, based upon the Greek philosophy or any kind of philosophy. So you see, even after all these things, you see, Aquinas' project predominantly endeavors to systemize the ideas in the works of the church fathers, and work out a consistent theology. So you see, he tried to systemize the understanding of the Christian understanding of the theology. So he tried to systemize it, to put them in order. So that was his main contribution. So nonetheless, he incorporates numerous new interests and knowledge into religion as he reconciles the Christian notions of God with the Greek philosophy. Just mark this a specific, a specific phrase, or the sentence that I should say. He reconciles the Christian notions of God with Greek philosophy. So you see, there is a kind of reconciliation. It's not a total amalgamation, or it's not a compromise, that you will not compromise your Christian faith while incorporating Greek philosophy to your faith. That means you will reconcile, you'll put them together, but Christian theology will be in its place and Greek philosophy will be in its place. But with the help of Greek philosophy, you will understand the Christian faith, but that will not tarnish, or that will not destroy your understanding or damage the understanding of Christian faith. So yeah, I understand truth can be known both by reason and by faith. Thus, reason is a tool for faith. So he used reason as for understanding of the faith. Reason is not completely something that, your faith will be based upon the reason. It's not like that. You will use reason, but that is just a tool to understand your faith. But that is not complete. That will not complete your faith, because faith mostly depends on the divine revelation. So you have to depend on the divine revelation, but at the same time, you can use reason to understand the faith. But that will not destroy your understanding of faith. I think that up to this, actually, we can leave our discussion. Now, if you have any question regarding today's lecture or previous lecture, you can ask me. Still, we have 5 minutes in our hand. So if you have any question, the floor is open. I will be very happy to answer your questions. Do you have any question? Or any opinion or any comment that you would like to give on? Anyone?
No, sir.
Okay, so the summary is that we have talked about the development of the medieval philosophy and some introductory discussion about the medieval philosophies, some of its traits, and also we talked about some of its main contributors or most important philosophers like Saint Augustine, then Boethius, and also the Saint Aquinas. So if you just concentrate on these three, that will be enough from this medieval age, and also the basic understanding of this, the philosophical trends and tendencies of this medieval philosophy. So that will help you to understand these two lectures, these consecutive lectures, and also it will help you to answer the questions in the coming exams. Okay? Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to upload this video as soon as possible. So those who missed the class, you don't need to worry about it in any way, because you're going to have the video with this recorded lesson, and I'll share it on your Facebook group as soon as I have this video in my hand. Okay?
Okay, sir.
All right. Still, if you have any question, you can leave your question on the Facebook group. I'll try to answer those questions as soon as possible. And we have another lecture today. I hope you remember that. So I will be talking in that lecture too. And in that lecture, we'll be talking about the Renaissance, the Renaissance philosophy in our next lecture. So I hope you will join us there. And thank you very much. And thanks for your cooperation.
Thank you, sir.
Very much so.